It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, and in the kitchen, the most important time of the year is starting again. Everything needs to be planned and prepared so that you can serve a nice meal on Christmas days. And of course, you also need the right idea. How about, for example, a traditional roast goose for 4 people? In this collection of recipes, I'm going to show you not just the recipe for roast goose, but also how to prepare a juicy goose leg or a pink roasted goose breast. I'll also explain how to properly make a goose sauce here. So let's dive into the recipes. Let's start with the crispy roast goose. Look how easy this is to do. I've already cleaned it out on the inside. Now we have our goose fat here. You can just take it out like that. I'm going to chop this up right away. I'm going to add this to my goose roaster because we're going to get so much goose fat anyway. Then we can also fry this right away. We have a wonderful base product for our goose fat. Then the goose itself. It still has whole wing here. And here is the joint. You can cut through it. That actually works really well. If you have a cleaver like this, please use it. Don't hit it there because that's where the tubular bone is. Then it splinters very quickly, and then it completely shatters into countless tiny pieces. 1,000 hits and it's all chopped up. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Be careful, this wing bone here. I'll turn it over once. Be careful, this wing bone here is just as thick as your little finger, okay? So, there it goes. Here we practically have the skin from the neck. I'm cutting that off completely. This also goes into the goose fat. It can be fried as well. And then the biggest point of contention, the tail. I'm taking it away. There it goes. To make sure our goose, it's a nice flavor from the inside while it's braising, I'm just taking our 3 onions. They're cut into large pieces. This filling will be sacrificed later. That's just supposed to bring us flavor inside the goose. My washed organic mandarin is going in. A bit of orange flavor. Season it generously with salt, because you have 4 kilos of meat and it needs to be seasoned from the inside too. Of course, also pepper. So, mix everything together. Put it into our goose. As I said, this is really just for the flavor from the inside. And you see, these 3 onions with the mandarin are more than enough. Now we want to season the goose from the outside as well. I always put quite a bit of salt on the breast, because I'm going to massage it all in again shortly. But I told you we want to do it quickly today. That means anything we can avoid, we're leaving out today. We already cooked the sauce a day in advance according to the recipe. Now we're adding the goose fat and the neck skin in here, and now we're putting it in the oven. 2.5 hours at 170 degrees. Close the lid and let it run. It's important to sprinkle a little bit of water over it every half hour. Then the skin will get really nice and crispy. Just a few seconds, and then 2 hours and 15 minutes will be up. We'll have a result. One last time I poured a little water over it. So I've practically done that every half hour. For the stuffing, I'm just chopping my onions into fine cubes. And I do the same with the dried fruit. Just cut it down. So for the stuffing, I've already taken out a little bit of the goose fat. Goes into my pan, and then we're adding onions and dried fruit. First, put the onions in the goose fat. Let them saute a bit, and in the meantime, chop the dried fruit. So, if that doesn't look delicious, we're now adding our dried fruit pieces on top. They just need to soak a bit and warm up. A little bit, the breadcrumbs, and our marjoram, salt, and pepper. Just give it a toss. What I find beautiful, what I think, is that this stuffing is so good simply because I make it myself. I can season it just the way I want. And I think it always looks more delicious. We're using mandarin in the goose, so I'm also adding a bit of mandarin zest to my stuffing, which we're of course making. We'll set it aside. It'll be served with the goose later. Aha! Crispy Christmas goose. Quickly brush over the skin. I'm going to get a little closer with the microphone. Crispy, crispy. That's how it should be. Here there's a pocket we can cut down like this. I think you can see it quite well. It's crispy, it's juicy. You can see it really well. And now we push the leg out a bit so that the thigh bone pops out of the joint. There it is. Let's go through it once. And just like that, we've deboned the leg. Now let's turn it over. It really looks great, doesn't it? And now we can basically go straight through the joint with the knife. Then we already have a whole piece. Now let's move on to the breast. We're going down left and right of the breastbone. Then we have the Y bone down here. You just have to go in from the back like this. And now we can also take the breast off the carcass. You can see it practically comes off on its own. Look, that really looks appetizing. And now we can also cut the breast into 2 or 3 pieces per person. Juicy roast goose. Please take a look at this. That looks really good. What we're missing here is some of our stuffing that we made separately. Really simple. Juicy roast goose. Super easy, super quick. Now I want to try a little piece. I love the meat from the leg. Look how juicy that is. Super tender, super juicy, and still crispy. I love it. And now the recipe for the goose leg. Don't worry, the recipe is really simple. Besides our goose legs, we only need a few more ingredients. Look, Carmen, there it is, our homemade goose fat. And this also comes from our goose. Of course, you can also buy it ready-made, but homemade is actually much, much nicer. I always do this before cooking, because that way I can salt my goose leg. And I always know exactly how much I need. If I just sprinkle it into the pot, I always have trouble, and often you end up with too little. That looks really good already. And these 2 beautiful legs are going straight into our goose fat. The goose fat is already slightly warmed up. We're putting our goose legs in there. And what's still missing here is apple and onion. We're just cutting our onions into rough pieces because they need to cook down and give us flavor. So no wasting time with any special cutting shapes. Just cut them into 8s, that's enough. And I take the apples with skin and all, meaning with the core and the peel, because they should also just give us flavor, and they need to cook down completely. Their taste and moisture will help keep our goose legs nice and juicy. So it's already starting to simmer gently here. Now we're going to add our roughly chopped onions and apples on top. Look, and that's more than enough. That was about 300 ml of goose fat, and you can see it's already a bit covered. Now we're adding peppercorns, bay leaves, and cloves, and also our mugwort. And to make sure the goose legs don't stick to the bottom, I'm adding just a tiny bit of water now. This water will evaporate during the cooking time. The goose fat will sit on top while the water settles at the bottom. This way the goose legs won't get any brown feet on the bottom. And now we're going to let it simmer on low heat for at least 1 hour. And then comes the skewer test. Poke it with a skewer, and when the goose leg slides off like a cooked potato, then they go into the oven and get crispy. So now we want to poke the goose leg with a wooden skewer, just like we do with cake batter. And look, if it slides down like that, then it's definitely done. That's what we want. Look how delicious it looks. But it's definitely not crispy at all. It's incredibly juicy right now. And this is all the goose fat here. And you can believe me, there's a lot of flavor in here. We're putting the legs in the oven now, and at a high temperature. Spread them a little apart so they don't stick together. We're going in at 220 degrees now, and we're just waiting for them to get crispy. It takes about 10 minutes. We have crispy legs, and the best part is they're crispy and still juicy. And we want to prove that now. Do you hear it? It's still crackling. The most important cut on a goose leg is here through the joint. Now let's see if Kalle gets it right. Look, just cut right through. And there we have absolutely really juicy goose meat. That's how goose legs are prepared. And now we're roasting a goose breast. Stay tuned, it's worth it. This wonderful goose breast, it's really meaty and fatty. That's why we want to prepare them a bit. And now we're going to cut a lot of small strips into it. That's called scoring. It's important not to cut into the meat, but really just score the skin, because that's where we want to get in. The fat should render out a bit there. The more cuts you make there, the better it is. If you find any quills at this point, they definitely need to come out. Look, without having damaged the meat. And we're just going to put them in there. Of course, without any extra fat. I didn't season the goose breasts either, because we just want to render out the fat a bit first. Carmen, isn't it incredible what has rendered out of the goose breasts? That's almost half a liter of goose fat. Now we need to quickly sear our goose breast on this side so it gets a little color too. And then we take it all out. Then we make our base. For that, we first need to take out all the fat, and of course we're going to save it. You can use it wonderfully, red cabbage and other dishes, or you can let it cool down. Cut in a bit of apple and onion, and then we have goose fat for the bread. We're now putting our onions to the roasting pan. I've just cut them into strips, and they're sweating a little bit with them. I always think it's great to have a coated roasting pan like this. It always works wonderfully. So, once they've become a bit translucent, and shouldn't really take on much color, we'll add our potatoes on top. And let them sweat a little too. And at this point, we can season it well with salt and pepper. We don't want to make fried potatoes from that. Instead, they should be braised in the oven. And now we're already adding our apple pieces because they're going to give us the flavor. Pairs wonderfully with the goose. And what else goes well with goose? Of course, the most popular spice for goose is mugwort. And now we're going to pour in vegetable broth to make everything a bit moist. We're going to add salt and pepper now, seasoning it from both sides. Look how delicious that looks. Very importantly, place it with the skin side up on our potato, apple, onion base. And now that goes into the oven. To keep an eye on everything, we're going to insert a meat thermometer into our goose breast because we want to reach a temperature of 59 degrees. So look, Carmen, we have 32.6 degrees, but we want to have 59 degrees. And we're going to do that very slowly. We need a bit more than 100 degrees to keep the skin nice and crispy. So our goose breast has reached 59 degrees. Our goose breast is now done. It's beautifully pink. We're going to keep them warm in the oven for a bit. Now we're going to do the following. We just turn off the oven and let the goose breast stay warm with the oven door open. And with our little potato base, I want the vegetable broth to be absorbed by the potatoes. That's why we're going to let it boil on high heat for another 5 minutes. So, look, it's completely juicy now, but almost dry. That's what we want for the potatoes, and our apples are still clearly visible. That's exactly what I want. We've braised the goose breast in a pot, we've cooked the potatoes, and we even have our fruit component, which is always popular in game and poultry dishes, right here in the pot. So now we just need our main star. Do you hear that, how crispy it is, Carmen? And now we want to slice the goose breast nice and thin. And just look at this color. Isn't that genius? And when you're slicing, always leave the pieces lying like that, because then it'll be much easier to plate later. And I mentioned earlier in the video that a goose breast is actually way too big for one serving. So for 2 to 3, maybe even 4 people, that's more than enough. Looks really delicious. Super tasty. That went really fast, didn't it? Now that's really a quick goose dish. And for those who like it a bit more well done, instead of 59, you set the core thermometer to 65, and then that's done. And now the most important part, to cook the goose sauce masterfully. Your guests will celebrate you, I promise you that. So our bones from the goose, and they're going to be roasted vigorously first. Be careful, you're splattering here. And look at all that goose fat that has come out. And that's what I was saying earlier. Please don't use any external oil. But we definitely want to save that goose fat. That's why we're just going to pour it into a second pot now. Look at that. That's definitely about 200 ml from just a few bones. And now we're adding our roasted vegetables. 2 parts onions, 1 part carrot and celery. And we're also going to roast the vegetables vigorously because they should give us some color. So, and the vegetables should also get a nice color. We're adding a little less tomato paste than usual, about a tablespoon. And we're going to mix that in as well because the tomato paste needs to be roasted too. And at this point, I say it every time, the tomato paste is mixing in very, very poorly. That's why we're helping it along with a good splash of red wine. Let's deglaze. Here we go again with some excitement. It has to be like that, because we want to have this same game of glazing and deglazing. Despite the big splash of red wine, we still have a very, very high temperature. That's how it should be. And look, nothing is stuck to the bottom of the pot yet. And we're already getting a noticeably browner, and that's where we want to go. And this glazing and deglazing, you know that from me, we're going to do that at least 4 times now. The red wine has completely reduced. That's how it should be. Now, new roasting flavors are developing in the same spots on the bones and the vegetables. That's what we need for our brown sauce. And before it gets too hot for me again, before it burns, I'm going to deglaze after the first roasting. So we're going to deglaze one last time. We're going to add more liquid. The sauce base already has a really nice color. Now we obviously need to let it simmer. Grandma always filled it up with water at this point. We're doing that today too. Our sauce base is filled up. We're going to bring that to a boil now. What we're missing now are our spices. Of course, I have our bay leaf here. I have a bit of lovage here, along with some peppercorns and cloves. Everything goes in there. And a very important spice when preparing goose is mugwort, a wonderful spice for our goose. Now we're going to add some salt. And then we should let this just simmer on low heat for at least 3 hours. You can really see how it's been cooked down now. It's been 3 hours now. Nice color, right? And now we want to turn that into a sauce. First of all, I'm going to strain our juice through a fine sieve. Remove any bone fragments and impurities. The vegetables have done their job. I'm not going to puree that, because if I were to strain it, sauce, which I've put so much effort into, would unnecessarily lighten up. We're going to let this drain for a moment. And here, we're making a brown roux now. For that, we're going to let the butter turn into brown butter first. That means the whey in the butter should be lightly toasted now. And that's how the butter got its name. It smells a bit nutty. And we're assuming about 1.5 liters of sauce. At this point, we have 80 grams of butter. And now we're going to add 90 grams of flour on top. Do you see how the butter is already changing? It's already got a slightly brownish color, but now you can see it very clearly. So don't let it burn, but just toast it a little. And now we're adding the flour on top. And the flour is also toasted a bit. Now you can clearly see that we have some roasting flavors here. You just have to stand by a little, because the butter and the flour are practically begging to burn, but we don't want it. Just a little, so that the color and the flavor change. When it looks like this, we already add the first splash of our jus. And this is, of course, the moment when it always looks weird, because right now we're cooking a thick, gooey mess. Look at that. It's really paste. But this is so valuable, because this way I can really work the flour butter mixture completely again, and especially stir it in so that no lumps are left. Look, and we're still missing a big chunk of our sauce. And we're adding that now. And now we can also change the tool. We're now taking a whisk and stirring it all smooth. Until we reach a decent consistency, the temperature can be turned down a bit now, because it can't get any hotter than boiling. Look, now it actually looks more like sauce. Of course, it's way too thick, that's clear. But we're still missing a good portion of our jus. And by stirring like this, we make sure that the last little lump dissolves and the remaining jus gets added. So, Carmen, there it is. So take a look at the shine. And I think the consistency is pretty great, right? We'll let it simmer for about 2 to 3 minutes so that the flour definitely cooks through. And the nice thing is you can also make this sauce a day in advance. And what I really love about my goose sauce is when I add 2 spoons of cranberry to it. Cranberries bring a bit of sweetness on one side, but also that tart note, my goose meal. If that isn't a good goose sauce, you have everything you need for your Christmas menu. We have duck, we have goose, duck legs, we have goose breasts, we have the sauces, we have red cabbage, we have Brussels sprouts, we have stuffed baked apples, red wine pears, flour dumplings, and bread dumplings. You are completely equipped. I wish you all an incredible amount of fun. Enjoy being celebrated with the good food. Stay healthy, everyone. We love you and we wish you wonderful Christmas.